You're listening to an Ono Media podcast.
Good morning, and thanks for joining me for Rise and Crime, your morning caffeine hit all about crime. I'm Mama Jules, and we're going to kick off today's episode with some measured good news. On March 7th, I gave you guys an update to the Preston Lord murder out of Queen Creek, Arizona. I also covered his murder on December 18th on Rise and Crime. I note those dates just in case if you want to go back and listen to how this case has rolled forward. But today, here's the good news. And I don't want to really call it a celebration, but it is good news. We do have arrests and we do have law enforcement doing good work because 3 adults and 4 juveniles are now facing murder and kidnapping charges in the fatal beating of 16-year-old Preston Lord. Now, all of the 7 arrested have connections to the Gilbert Goonies. So quick reminder, the Gilbert Goons or Goonies are a group of rich and mostly white young men in Gilbert, Arizona, who have allegedly attacked innocent young teens just for fun. Some attacks were brutal beatings, and most attacks were recorded by bystanders or other goons, and then those videos were posted to various social media sites. And this disgusting behavior had been going on for a couple of years when last October, following a Halloween get-together with over 100 area teens, Preston Lord was attacked and beaten to death in a Queen Creek residential area. Now, Preston's death was pivotal for a few reasons. It was a murder where other beatings had been brutal and life-altering, but no one had died. It was also pivotal because it happened in a different jurisdiction. Queen Creek law enforcement seemed from the get-go to just not be scared of the rich parents. Or maybe they were more aggressive due to it being a murder. Maybe it was both. But for me, I could just see a big difference in the way that the Queen Creek authorities were approaching the affluent gang versus the way the Gilbert law enforcement was approaching the gang. And it was also pivotal because Preston Lord's family and friends showed up. They have not let this case grow cold or unnoticed. In those last 2 updates, I talked about how young men were brought in following different beatings because law enforcement clearly had video evidence. But it seemed the young men were always under 18 years old and that the Gilbert Police Department treated the brutal attacks almost more like juvenile mischief. Okay, that's just my opinion here. The Gilbert police have not been officially accused of wrongdoing in this case. I'm just reading it from afar, and that's the impression I'm getting. In the second update to the Gilbert Goonies on Rise and Crime, I told you about a father who filed a lawsuit against the Chandler School District and more than 3 dozen parents and teens who he claimed were involved in the beating of his son. In that update, I also told you about a father of an alleged Gilbert Goonie who was involved in the death of Preston Lord. Okay, see, a former employee of the company that father works for came forward and implicated the father in covering up his son's violent behavior. Now, both that lawsuit and the wealthy father are part of today's update. So let's get into it. On March 6th, a grand jury handed out multiple indictments of murder and kidnapping after hearing and seeing the evidence obtained by Queen Creek investigators in the beating death of Preston. Now, initially, 4 individuals were charged, and then the 3 additional individuals were charged over the next few days. Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell said that despite the investigation into Preston's death taking months, she wanted people to understand that significant work had been poured into the case. And Queen Creek Police Chief Randy Bryce said that detectives knew pretty early on who had killed Preston. It just took these months of gathering evidence, convincing people to turn over video footage, and also mapping out the actions of those involved by reviewing over 600 pieces of video evidence for the charges to stick. Now, Chief Bryce also told Arizona Central that more charges could be coming. All right, so who are the 7 charged? Who, by the way, all entered pleas of not guilty to their charges. Okay, here's the 7. 18-year-old Treston Billy was charged with robbery because authorities say he stole a necklace connected to the beating death of Preston. Billy was also named in the lawsuit that I talked about earlier that was filed by the father of another beating victim. Now, 18-year-old Owen Hines was charged in Preston's death, but he was also already being held for charges related to other Goonie attacks. Gilbert police accuse Owen Hines of being involved in an attack on a teen at a Gilbert house party a year and a half ago. He is also being accused of attacking a teen outside of the Gilbert In-N-Out Burger in December of 2022. He also was named in the lawsuit. Now, 17-year-old Jacob Meisner has been charged in Preston's death. He was already in a youth detention center where he is being held on suspicion of 2 other Gilbert Goon attacks. He has been named in 2 lawsuits filed by parents. That massive lawsuit by the father that targeted 17 teens and 26 parents, and then a smaller lawsuit filed by the parents of a beating victim in a Mesa Park attack. Okay, another person arrested, 19-year-old Taylor Sherman. He was charged in Preston's attack and is part of the Mesa Park attack lawsuit. 20-year-old Dominic Turner was charged with robbery in Preston's attack. Okay, that leaves us with 2 more alleged aggressors, and I saved them for the last because their stories have more context. First off, there is 17-year-old Talon Vigil. Now, this young man seems to basically have incriminated himself in Preston's attack. Just minutes after Preston was killed, Talon allegedly climbed into the car of his former girlfriend and started bragging about how he had knocked that kid out. And then, just days after Preston's murder, Talon allegedly took to Snapchat, where he seems to make a confession about the murder. In the video, he says that he hit the kid, and then the kid fell and hit his head, and then they kicked his head into the ground, and then he got word the kid had died. And then he followed it up with a Snapchat that said, IDK, or I don't know. Okay, I just want to point out something here. He calls him the kid repeatedly. He doesn't have any tie to Preston. There's no bad blood. There's no score to settle. These violent teens just chose people to attack. He can't even do the decency of knowing his name. And it's not just this boy. I just happen to have his words because he put it out there on social media. All of these Goonies seem to not care about who they attack. They just attack. And they won't even offer those they hurt or kill the decency of calling them by their names. All right, that leaves us with 1 arrest, and the last of the 7. I updated you on his father, Travis Renner, and the actions that were taken by him and his son following the attack. Okay, in that update, I told you that a former employee had told authorities that Travis moved his son Talon to the east side of Arizona following the attack in order for his hurt hand to heal without people being able to notice he had a hurt hand. He was also accused by that former employee of restructuring funds in the company just in case he was sued or arrested. Well, guess what? Both have happened. 17-year-old Talon Renner was charged with murder for Preston's death. And his father? Well, he's been arrested as well on drug charges. And another son and Talon's older brother, Kyler, has been arrested for 2 gang attacks that happened in Gilbert, one in a parking garage in December of 2022, and another at that now infamous house party in November of 2022. But there's more to this family. On the day of the indictments, 2 Maricopa County deputies allegedly offered, quote, valet parking to Travis and Becky Renner. Apparently, they pulled the couple's Tesla around to the back of the courthouse so that they could avoid journalists during the court proceedings. After an ABC reporter brought the valet services to light, the MSCO issued an apology saying, despite their intention to prevent potential conflict or disruption at the courthouse, the 2 deputies failed to seek supervisory guidance or coordinate with judicial staff upon receiving the escort request from the family legal representative. Both deputies involved have been reassigned from the Juvenile Court Center as we continue to examine the incident. All right, I kind of said that really snarky because, come on, really? Valet services? All right, it seems Travis and Becky receive that preferential treatment because they're very, very wealthy. After owning several Orange Fitness Theory franchises, they sold those and opened other gyms, and they have quite the presence in the Gilbert area. Okay, I think it's fair to say people in the area invested in this murder were duly outraged by this preferential treatment. Right, there's one more item before we move on. Both the Gilbert and the Queen Creek police chiefs agreed to an interview with Bianca Buono of 12 News in Arizona. In that interview, the Gilbert police chief, Michael Solberg, admitted that they had received over 250 911 calls regarding teen-on-teen violence, and all of that happened over the last 2 years. And he also admitted he has had previous contact with all 7 teens who were arrested and charged in Preston's death. All right, those interactions range from underage drinking to reckless driving to damaging farm equipment and to also damaging private property. And with some of the 17s, the interactions with police were numerous. Okay, let me give you just one example of one teen. One of the teens had 4 juvenile arrests for alcohol consumption, disorderly conduct related to fireworks, criminal damage for doing donuts with farm equipment, and an aggravated assault. And besides those things I just listed, there were 7 other interactions with Gilbert PD with just this one teen. Now, the journalist, Bianca, she was bold with Chief Solberg and asked if all this evidence showed a breakdown in the Gilbert police system. The chief responded by saying that despite those interactions with the 17s, there was nothing the police could have done differently that would have taken the teens off the streets. He followed that up by saying that their actions as a police force were not responsible for the beating death of Preston Lord. Bianca pushed back. She said, "But hey, you had video evidence of assaults with brass knuckles and other attacks." And Chief Solberg responded by saying he didn't get that video information until after Preston's death, even though the attacks with brass knuckles happened months prior to that murder. Well, she then pushed back again, and she said, "But did your office respond to those attacks at the In-N-Out Burger and the other places?" He responded by saying they did go out to those attacks, but when they got there, most of the kids had scattered. Okay, I'll leave it up to you guys to decide how you feel about his comments. I'm going to give you one of my opinions. Preston Lord's family deserves a ton of credit for the movement in the Gilbert Goonies. All right, when asked by Bianca about the 7 arrests, Queen Creek Police Chief Bryce said he would hold his comments until after trial because for him, the most important thing is to get justice for Preston Lord. He reiterated that he would not damage the trial by saying something prematurely, but he did promise that he has very specific information on all 7 of the men and boys and that the activity that they were engaged in will come to light during the trial. Big shout out to Bianca from 12 News. It was a strong interview. Well done. Now, all 17s will be charged as adults. The next hearings will be held in April. I'll keep you updated on those hearings. And now to this story out of Los Angeles, where a fertility doctor has been found guilty of strangling his 45-year-old wife and staging that death to look like she fell down the stairs. Eric Sills and his wife Suzanne ran a fertility clinic in Carlsbad, California. Both the husband and wife were well educated, Eric being a graduate of the University of Tennessee College of Medicine and also the University of Westminster in London, and Suzanne having earned her MBA from the University of Miami. The couple had been married for 12 years and seemed to thrive as business partners. He was the medical practitioner and she was the managing partner. Life appeared from the outside looking in to be happy and privileged. The couple had 12-year-old twins. Okay, interesting, with him being a fertility doctor, it made me want to know if they were naturally conceived or if his medical practice and knowledge helped them have twins. Just something that intrigued me. But anyway, they have 12-year-old twins, Mary Catherine and Eric Scott, and they also live in an over $1 million home in San Clemente. But all of that, it was all shattered when on the morning of November 13th of 2016, Dr. Sills called 911 and said he had woke up to discover his wife unconscious at the bottom of their staircase. It gets weird in the 911 call though. When Dr. Sills is talking to the dispatcher, he says, "We've got a patient here who's fallen off the stairs, and I don't have a pulse. I think she tripped because it was dark." Okay, did you catch that? He calls his wife a patient. He says, "We've got a patient here who's fallen off the stairs." Now, when first responders arrived, they did find Suzanne dead at the bottom of the stairs, and homicide detectives were immediately called to the scene because things just didn't check out. First off, there were signs of a struggle. Blood and bruising were present on Suzanne's skin. Secondly, blood was found on the drapes of their daughter's bedroom window. And third, their distraught 12-year-old son told detectives that his parents had been fighting early that morning. He said his mother had been sleeping in his sister's room and that he had been awakened at 4 a.m. to his parents fighting in that bedroom. Well, the next couple of weeks just rolled forward. Eric went on as the grieving spouse, and the twins were motherless and trying to cope. Dr. Sills was telling people that Suzanne had been suffering from a migraine for several days, and that because of that migraine, he believed she had become dizzy from the headache and fallen down the stairs. But when the medical examiner determined in the autopsy that Suzanne was strangled, the investigators worked to gather as much evidence as they could before making their arrest of Dr. Sills. He was pulled over on his way to work on an April morning more than 2 years after his wife died and arrested and booked into the Orange County Jail. He was being charged with second-degree homicide. After 4 days, he was released after posting a $1 million bail. Now, that was 2019. It took 5 years before he went to trial, and that's 7 years of Dr. Sills free before the arrest and then on bond. But finally, in December, Dr. Sills faced the charges, and he was found guilty of the murder of his wife, Suzanne. Okay, after the pathologist determined that Suzanne was killed by strangulation, investigators honed in on the positioning of the body, like the way that they found Suzanne on that November morning. They said even though the dispatcher had told Dr. Sills to lay Suzanne on a hard, flat surface in order to perform CPR, investigators said her leg was still elevated on the staircase, and they surmised that the doctor left her that way in order to link her to a staircase fall. They also said that while on the phone with the dispatcher, Dr. Sills, who was a trained physician, did not immediately start CPR. Instead, he rummaged through the house looking for a pulse oximeter in order to gauge the oxygen level in his wife's body. And while searching for the pulse oximeter, his twins are awake and crying in the background of the 911 call. Now, investigators had also uncovered text messages between the couple that caused alarm. For several months prior to her death, the couple had fought bitterly about their work life, also about Eric's 2 children from his previous marriage, and then also about concerns about the doctor's temper. In one text, she wrote that she would never be free from him or their marriage. She texted the phrase, "You are killing me, don't you see? I just want out." Investigators had also discovered that Suzanne had posted a topless photo online, which they claimed infuriated Dr. Sills. Okay, here's how all that went down. It seems she had lost a bet. The bet was that Donald Trump would be the Republican nominee in the 26th presidential race, and that her wager on the bet was if she lost, she would post a photo. Well, she did post the topless photo, and according to investigators, that really bothered her husband. Now, during the trial, for the now 58-year-old physician, prosecutors claimed that Suzanne had died from strangulation an hour and a half before Dr. Sills called 911. And each side had a different conclusion when they addressed Dr. Sills calling his wife a patient during that 911 call. The prosecutor said he referred to her that way because he was unfeeling and cold. But the defense said he used that language because he went into doctor mode. Now, the defense also argued that due to the days-long migraine that Suzanne was suffering, that she had continued to take medication, and that medication impaired her balance. They said that medication caused her to become dizzy and fall down the stairs. They then argued that the fall actually injured her spine, which made it so she couldn't breathe. And that's why she suffocated. And that she really wasn't strangled. Okay, hold on. I know you're saying, but weren't there marks on her neck? Well, the answer is yes, she did have marks on her neck. But the defense said those marks came after the fall when the family's two large and friendly dogs had somehow gotten out of their kennels and become distressed by their owner's fall down the stairs. The defense believed that the dogs tugged and tugged on the scarf that was around Suzanne's neck, and that the dog's behavior with that scarf was where the marks on her neck came from, and that's why the medical examiner was able to come to a conclusion that she was strangled. Okay, of course, the prosecution called that theory ludicrous, and instead, they said that Dr. Sills had, quote, squeezed the life out of his wife amid a violent struggle in their daughter's bedroom, because in that bedroom, they found the blood on the curtains, and they also found a clump of Suzanne's hair on the floor. Now, despite all the evidence, the prosecution did admit at trial that they really didn't have a clear motive for the argument that occurred the morning of Suzanne's death. They said they actually didn't need a specific motive from that morning, that all the evidence points to Dr. Sills killing Suzanne, and that is what was required. Well, the jury agreed, and on December 19th of last year, Dr. Sills was found guilty of second-degree murder. And last week, he was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Hard and difficult times have followed the murder of Suzanne Sills. The family has experienced financial distress, and according to the prosecution, the family unit has been irreparably harmed. Let's at least remember Suzanne today. She was a driven woman who was vice president of her high school class and a varsity cheerleader. She had obtained her BA from George Mason University and left behind several siblings and parents and step-parents, and of course, her twins when she was murdered. An online chat group talked about how beloved she was by the patients the clinic had helped with fertility issues over the prior 2 years before her death. I hope the finality of the trial and the sentencing can help her family through this grief process. All right, you guys, 2 quick notes to finish out this week's episode. First, Ethan Crumbley's father, James Crumbley, was found guilty of 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter for his role in his son Ethan's mass shooting spree at Oxford High School in Michigan on November 30th of 2021. His wife, Jennifer Crumbley, was also found guilty of those same charges, and I have previously covered that on Rise and Crime. Both James and Jennifer will be sentenced in April, and they each face up to 15 years in prison. Okay, let's talk about James' trial, though, because the 2 trials, Jennifer's and James, they weren't exact. You might think that they would be, because how was the evidence any different? But they actually weren't the same. In Jennifer's, the prosecution focused heavily on her personal life. They dug into her text history with her son and her husband and her, what some would call lover. But in James' trial, the prosecution focused on how he stored his firearms and how that carelessness led to Ethan obtaining that gun to commit the 4 murders. Because Jennifer's trial was focused so much on her personal relationships, she chose to testify, which in my opinion did her no favors. But James, he chose to stay silent at his trial, almost distancing himself from the responsibility of parenthood. Now, the defense strategy seemed to be, I would say, clinical. He was providing and protecting, and they said he wasn't aware of the personal problems in his son's life. Now, with that strategy in mind, the prosecution attacked the way that James stored the firearms, highlighting a text that Ethan had sent to his friend. Now, this text happened 3 months before the shooting. And in the text, he told his friend that his dad had left out a firearm, so he was practicing loading and handling the gun. And then the prosecution also showed evidence that the Sig Sauer 9mm that Ethan used to kill 4 fellow students, well, they said that firearm was purchased by his father just days before the shooting, and that the cable lock that was sold with that gun was found by investigators to still be in its plastic packaging, clearly unused by James. Now, this implied that the gun had never been locked up, and James was not acting as a responsible parent with the storing of the gun. Now, the prosecution also said that 2 other guns were found in the Crumbley home in a safe, but the locking mechanism on the safe was set to the factory default code of 000. They surmised that this would be very easy for Ethan to get into the safe. Well, it took the jury 10 hours to find James guilty. And this case is truly a landmark case. It is the first time in the United States that parents of a mass shooter have been held criminally responsible for the shooter's crimes. As a reminder, Ethan is spending the rest of his life in prison, pending his appeals. He has no possibility of parole. Hannah St. Juliana was one of Ethan's victims on that November day, and her father Steve said the following after James' guilty verdict. Here's what he said. "We can put people on the moon. We can build skyscrapers, huge monuments like the Hoover Dam, and we can't keep our kids safe in schools. I think people just need to wake up and take action. Stop accepting the excuses." Well, it appears Michigan lawmakers did do something, because last year they enacted legislation that went into effect this year that changed how firearms should be stored and the legal ramifications that one would face if those firearms were not stored properly and then were used in the act of committing a felony. I'll make sure I let you know how James and Jennifer are sentenced in April. And the second quick update. Elizabeth Smart marked the 21st anniversary of her rescue from her kidnapping by sharing a TikTok video that was filled with hope and light. Elizabeth was abducted from her bed in June of 2002 by a street pastor named Brian David Mitchell. He had done some work at the Smart home and was familiar with Elizabeth and the rest of the family. Elizabeth was held in captivity by Mitchell and his wife, Wanda Barzee, for 9 months. After traveling homeless through several states, Mitchell returned to Utah with Barzee and Elizabeth. It was then that Elizabeth was recognized by a couple who had watched the America's Most Wanted episode, and they called the Sandy, Utah Police Department. We report on so much tragedy here because there is tragedy, and it's real, and it needs recognized. But we should also report on the good. So here, give Elizabeth's TikTok video a listen.
Today is March 12th, and it will always be a reminder that miracles happen and that there are dreams that come true and that good things are abundant in this world. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Elizabeth Smart, and back in 2002, I was kidnapped and I was held hostage for 9 months, but I was rescued on March 12th of 2003. So today is 21 years since I was rescued. And I know anniversaries mean a lot of different things for different people. And I respect whatever it means to everyone individually. But for me, it really is a reminder that life is good and that dreams really do come true, and that we should never, ever give up, because we all have hard times and we all have struggles, but good things do come. And I think that's really important. I think it's really important to savor the happiness in life and savor the joy in life. So no matter where you're at, I hope you find happiness.
You guys, let's echo Elizabeth's words. No matter where you're at, Rise and Crime listeners, I hope you find the happiness today. I turned 51 yesterday. And each year brings new joy and new adventure and new friendships, and most importantly, deepened family relationships. If you can, find the good today. And if it's not today because it's just too dark, maybe it can be brighter tomorrow. Much love to all of you with this Monday episode of Rise and Crime. Thanks for enriching my life and, quite honestly, my children's lives. We love doing this work together as a family. Please give us a 5-star rating and a review, and subscribe so that we can continue to tackle the tough and heartbreaking and sometimes celebratory stories. Join me again on Thursday for more morning crime news. I'm Mama Jules, and keep safe out there.